Hello there. We're at the midway point of the retreat, and I'm hearing from a few of you that it is nothing like what you expected, and I think that is in a good way. But let me tell you this, there is a lot more to come in the rest of the retreat, a long way that we can cover, both in the practice and both in the things that we're going to discuss, the teachings of the Buddha that we're going to learn. We've got a few interesting things today. So let me start off with the first one. Going to be talking about concepts and mental models to begin with. Okay. So let me share my screen, use a visual aid for this. So I love this quote by George E.P. Box. It's a very famed statistician. And he says something very interesting. He says, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So if you think about it, all models are representations of reality, but they are not accurate representations, right? If you have a simple Excel model that for your company, for instance, right? That is a model that you have of how things work, but that's not the exact reality of how things work in the world. However, even though models may be inaccurate, maybe they're not capturing all the richness of reality, some models are useful. And making this distinction is very important. There may be some models that are useful, some models that are actually harmful for us. So we'll use a few examples to kind of unpack this a little bit. So the Buddha used the word sanya in Pali or sangya in Hindi and Sanskrit, right? So to denote the idea of concepts, the base of concepts, the aggregate or the entirety of concepts and mental models that we hold in our mind. So you can think of it as a warehouse of concepts or a heap of concepts. Let's look at this image. I'm sure every one of you would be able to identify this as Mahatma Gandhi. To be fair, this what we are seeing on the screen looks nothing like Mahatma Gandhi, does it? It doesn't match his complexion. It doesn't match his actual height. It represents, even if you look at it from a drawing perspective, it is representing only part of a human body. Uh, Mahatma Gandhi was not without legs, right? However, in our mind, we are able to identify exactly who this is. If I showed you just the hand part of it, you may not be able to identify who it is. But if I showed you the spectacles, especially, and the bald head, you would definitely be able to identify who this is. So you have a mental model of Mahatma Gandhi that can be identified right from a 500 rupee note to a photo of Mahatma Gandhi or a video of him walking, right? Or a caricature or a cartoon like this, right? You're able to do that. So this is an example of a model that is not accurate necessarily, right? It is one of those models that are wrong, but it is a useful model. So let's come to the second image, right? So most of you must have seen this at some point trying to get into a website or trying to read an article where they want to check that this is a human that's accessing the article, right? And it says select all images with a bus. So what's happening here? You are processing all the information. So remember what we talked about information processing, right? This is one of the things when contact happens, it means there is some information, there is a sense space that is associated with it, and there is information processing that is happening. This information processing is also known as Vinyana or Vigyan, right? Discriminating capability, ability to discern, also known many times as consciousness. Now, this faculty helps us to do a few things, right? It helps us to identify the green from the gray and if you look at the image at the top left, the green from the gray, the white from the black, and the outline of the tail light and the outline of the window. It helps us to discriminate information. But Sangya or concepts is actually allowing you to add labels to what information you are seeing, right? You can see that this is a car, you can see that it has a tail light, it has a tire, the tire has a hubcap, you can see doors, you can see windows, you can look at the different elements, right? So consciousness or information processing or Vigyan is the faculty that allows you to process information, separate one thing from the other, right? And Sangya allows you to store mental models and labels. Again, we are looking at a picture of a car. We are not looking at actually a car, but for the purpose, for the context, we are able to see that there is a vehicle and that is not a bus, right? So, which is what the task that we have to accomplish here. When we look at the other images, again, we are able to identify, we are able to discriminate different elements, and we are able to identify a bus. Because it is not relevant, for instance, in this image, you are not going to spend time looking at the color of the building or the number of windows in it. That information is not relevant. We are processing a slice of reality and we are using our attention to do that. We are identifying different elements using the labels that we have, our information processing abilities allowing us to distinguish between different elements. And finally, we are able to come to a decision that this is a bus and it's allowing us to reach our purpose here, which is to identify images with a bus. Just like that, we can also have very evolved concepts. So initially we've been just talking about concepts that involve identifying a person or identifying a vehicle, right? These are physical things that are present in the world that we have encountered in the past, even though we have not encountered these specific cars or these specific buses, or for that matter, Mahatma Gandhi himself, right? So we have concepts of them, we have ideas of them, we have mental models of them. But mental models do not need to be restricted to things that are physical, things that are objects. They can also be very complex. So the idea of freedom or friendship, justice, betrayal. So I've put a few words here. These are also concepts or mental models. So there is a way in which we are forming them. And again, they can vary widely in the richness of information, right? So just like you might actually see a person and be able to identify them, you may be able to see their video, you may be able to identify them, you may be able to see their image and identify them, you may be able to see a caricature and identify them, right? So there are different levels of information that are associated with certain models, and these are also associated with many other schemas of information. So for example, your information, when you were looking at the set of images from which you had to select a bus, you would have inspected this car a little more closely just to make sure it is not a bus, right? Because it belongs to a closer cluster of objects of mental models, that is vehicles. You would not look at a tree or you would not look at the grass and spend time wondering whether this is potentially a bus. Okay, so that is about concepts. And like we discussed, all models are inaccurate, but some may be useful. And this brings us to models and reality. Do we really experience reality or do we just create models in our mind of reality, right? And very, very simple way to illustrate this. I'm sure many of you have come across either this specific illustration or other optical illusions, right? So here we have some kind of a checkered board, some kind of a board with a cylinder on, with something on top of it, right? So you have two squares or two tiles or two polygons that are marked A and B. So take 5 seconds, look at them closely, and you know, tell me, are they the same color? Now, as soon as I put a bar of the color of A across the two of them, you can see very clearly that they are actually the same color. But as soon as I take it off, again, it appears to be a checkered board where alternate squares are dark gray and light gray, respectively. And it appears that there's a clever use of this cylinder and the appearance of a shadow being cast by the cylinder to fool our mind. So, what's happening is we are not perceiving reality in all its richness. What we are trying to do is reduce it to the minimum or most compressed type of models that help us to make sense of what's happening. So, here the easiest way, the minimum energy way, the minimum computation way of getting to this point was simply to look at it and say there is a checkered board with a cylinder on top of it, instead of trying to look at exactly what is the color of each single square here, right? So, the point that I'm trying to make is when we look at reality, we don't experience it as it is. We experience it in terms of mental models that are extremely compressed. So we don't look at the entire richness of reality. We look at a very low quality representation of reality. So why is this important? This is important because it starts affecting how we behave in different situations, how we act in different situations, how we make decisions. To discuss that, what I'm going to do is go back to the previous example that we've been building on slowly, right? We have a person who's walking by, ready, really thinking about a presentation that they have to make tomorrow, something that is very critical for them. And they are passing a bakery shop. And suddenly, the smell of freshly baked pie comes to them, right? So, this is contact happening, the internal sense space, along with the external information, which is the smell coming from that pie, and information processing or consciousness coming together with that. The meeting of these three is contact, right? So, this is an information event that is happening. Now, as soon as this happens, so another thing that we have to remember, along with as we discussed with the Brahma Viharas and the sympathetic or parasympathetic system, or with the physical smile and the state of mind that it elicits, right? So there is a feedback loop that is happening between our physicality or the material world and our consciousness or information processing faculties. So this link is known as mentality materiality. You can think of it as a mind matter interface, and it is not a one-way interface, it is a two-way feedback loop interface, right? So consciousness or information processing is affecting our material cells, and our material cells is conditioning or affecting the consciousness. Okay, now coming back to that contact happening, that event happening, the smell coming, the person perceiving that smell, right? So the contact happening between the sense base, the information, and the information processing ability. This is immediately followed by a sensation that comes up. In this case, it is a pleasant sensation that is coming up. What's also happening is, along with the sensation, which is obviously colored by our conditioning or formation, somebody who likes pie, somebody who's really hungry at that time, or somebody who's had great experiences eating pie at that place. So all those conditionings come in, kick into play when the sensation is coming up and color the sensation. So along with the sensation, two other things are also continuously trying to make sense of reality. So one is our information processing ability is working continuously with sensation, and our concepts are also working continuously with sensation. So we are trying to make sense of what it is. So together they are making sense. Okay, the baked goods. Okay, and then it might evolve further to pie. right? And then it may evolve further to blueberry pie, and it may evolve further to my favorite blueberry pie that I always have at this place, right? And it may evolve further to my favorite blueberry pie that I always have at this place, but slightly overcooked today, right? So that sensation is getting fine tuned accordingly, and your sensation is working along with your information processing and your concepts to kind of start to make sense of what is happening. While this is happening, craving kicks in, right? Craving says, okay, what do we do about this situation? I like it or I don't like it. And if I like it very much, all my attention goes there. So as the craving goes up towards this sensation, towards this event that has happened in our environment, our attention goes towards it and we get personalized with it. So now it is no longer that there is a smell coming and it is a smell of blueberry pie. It is a now it is about I want this, right? So the story has become personal from an impersonal start where this person is walking, minding their own business, looking at what is important for them, what they need to get done, to suddenly something else that has come up. And it is colored by that feeling of I want it or I don't want it, or I like it, I don't like it. What happens next is as these things are coming up, right? Craving says, this is the most important thing in my environment. I like it, I don't like it. Do something about it, right? So it's kind of making a noise about something to be done about it. The next mechanism that kicks in is something called clinging, right? And clinging tells the story of why we like something or why we don't like something. So it is bringing in your views and opinions. So you may have registered that it is a pie, a blueberry pie, and now it is getting into a story. Either it is saying, "Oh, I wish I had not eaten so much at lunch because I would have really loved that," or it is getting into the story of, "I've not had this for a long time. I really deserve it," right? Or it's going into taglines like, "I'm worth it," right? Or it is getting into a story of, "I really want to have it, but I've been advised by my doctor not to," right? So it could be anything like that. So you are now starting to make opinions, have your views come up about the situation. Now why is this important, right? So this clinging, these views and opinions are driven by the craving. So as long as the craving says I want it, I want it, I want it, right? And we'll have a quick discussion on this. So as long as our mind goes, I want it, I want it, I want it, we get further and further drawn into that story. So let's connect this back to the story of heaven and hell that we shared earlier, right? So as soon as the monk says to him, okay, you dirty person, you're a disgrace to the samurai establishment and clan. Immediately on hearing those, the contact that's happening is those words, right? And the sensation is obviously painful related to that. And there is a craving that I don't like this. Now, what's happening next is essentially your mind is trying to model the reality to decide the next action that one should take. How should I respond to this situation? And now your views, opinions, stories are coming in, which are all colored by your conditioning, that is, your genetic predisposition, your experiences in life, the context of the moment. So this person is has millions of cycles of thought going in their mind, right? So how dare anybody speak to me? I'm a victorious samurai, well respected samurai. How dare anyone speak to me? It can go into further as the craving continues to sustain that thought process. It can go into, this person I can kill with one blow and still he dares to speak like this to me. Or it can go to a feeling of injustice, right? I just asked a simple question and this person is downright insulting me. How dare they, right? So it can go get caught up in a very complex story. So all your views, opinions are coming up. So what's happening is now a contact happened, a information event happened, certain words were spoken and they were heard. So the information was the words, there was the sense base of the ear and the ability to process audible information. So that happened, the contact happened. There was a painful sensation, which was becoming more painful as the meaning of those words was starting to be understood, right? The word dirty, that has a associated mental model, right? Disgrace to samurai establishment, that has a lot of schemas are lighting up in your mind, right? What does this mean? And immediately that sensation becomes more and more painful. It may start with the tone, little painful, the sensation becomes more and more painful. As this gets more and more painful, the craving gets stronger and stronger. I don't like it, I don't like it. And then comes the storytelling that is happening, modeling of reality. The modeling of the reality is that I am a person with power and I can finish you in one go. You are a person with no wealth or property, and you're a tiny person, you're old and frail, and you are speaking like this to me. I am armed, you're unarmed, you're on the floor, I have the advantage of my position, right? And you're saying things that are the worst thing that I could possibly hear, being a disgrace to a samurai. So that whole storytelling happens. What happened in reality? There are, without craving, what the person might have seen was, okay, this person said something. Do I need to act on it, and how do I need to act on it? Could have made an assessment of that. But with craving, it became more and more personal. It became more and more irritating to the person, getting him to the point where he was filled with murderous rage and about to kill that monk. And this story perhaps could have gone the other way. Maybe the monk was not able to stop him in time, and just reacting to that one statement, this person ended up murdering someone, right? So clinging continues to make an event more and more personal. It continues to create an entire reality, a story of what's happening, which is colored extremely by that craving and that sensation, right? The craving of I don't like it. So this is entirely colored by I don't like it, right? A person could have been simply curious, right? The same samurai could have told the Zen monk, Master, I don't understand why you would speak to me like that, right? Or Master, I'm sorry I disturbed you, and it's okay. Take it easy, instead of committing an act of murder, right? So there could have been different things, but that craving made sure the attention was caught up in that event, and the entire storytelling, the way this person was looking at the universe, was colored by that craving. Now, what happened? The next thing the monk said, that this is hell, immediately registered with the samurai. Again, it could have been a different samurai. It could have been, he may not have registered that the monk was actually trying to teach him a lesson, and he may have gone ahead and murdered him. And immediately, what happened? Now, a different kind of sensation came in. So it was perhaps not as filled with craving, perhaps it was. But the situation changed entirely. The interpretation of the situation became, okay, this is such a compassionate monk and he has deigned to help me. So it may have a flavor of I like it, but it is not something that is causing the person to do something unwholesome and harmful, right? It is just helping him become wiser and actually understand what's happening. So nothing changed in the world outside. Certain words were uttered, and immediately a certain meaning was assigned to them. And from one moment where this was a lowly person daring to insult this mighty samurai, to this was the such an insightful and compassionate and kind teacher who would risk his life to teach a stranger an important lesson about life. Right? The entire story changed. So the story that was unwholesome, the story that would have led to an act of violence, that would have led to probably punishment and maybe years of regret, was triggered by the way the person chose to weave the story. Many of you might have seen news debates, no matter where you are living. News debates, it's become fashionable to have 8 people screaming at each other. And it's very interesting. Sometimes I see this, and all the 8 people are talking about taking a bunch of facts. They're using facts. And none of them is speaking a lie from a factual perspective. But they all have extremely different viewpoints, extremely different narratives, which are colored by what they like or don't like, what they're clinging to. and all of them are annoyed, screaming at each other, hating each other, not learning anything, and trying to outscream the other person, right? So clinging covered when it is flavored by craving can lead to really, really unwholesome actions. It does not allow you to see the larger picture. It does not allow you to take a step back and see what is useful, what is appropriate, what is the action that I have. And all this entire unwholesome thought process, which is putting your body in the sympathetic mode, which is creating millions of cycles of negativity in your mind, it is all held up by that craving. Just the fact that we didn't diffuse that craving led to this entire storytelling exercise. Nothing changed, no action could be taken at that point, no action was potentially available for you, but still you chose to burn your blood, going through these many cycles. And this happens with a lot of other things, right? So assume that so in every house, for instance, there are people who are more orderly than the others, people who are more hygienic than the others, and it's a tough life for them because others around them keep making mistakes that are painful from their conditioning perspective, right? So let's assume somebody put a wet towel on the bed, right? And the entire narrative that the another person walks in and sees that, right? And immediately it gives a painful sensation. And it's more painful for that person because of how they're conditioned. As long as they're stuck with craving, their mind will go into millions of cycles of how how dare they do it, right? So like, why am I taken for granted? Am I the only person who's supposed to do this? Am I supposed to pick up after everyone? The story becomes about you. Maybe the other person had something really urgent to do. You don't necessarily know the other entire story. And maybe the person was actually negligent. What you might actually want from a wholesome perspective is next time, maybe they can do something that helps them to remember not to leave the wet towel on the bed, right? But instead of thinking of that solution, something that will make your life and the other person's life better in the future, what you'll do is you'll spend millions of cycles of mental energy and computation to feel bad about it, feel terrible about it, make it completely about you. Why is the world aligned against me, right? So that's what craving does and clinging does, right? So craving always says that there is something in the world that I don't like, right? So if you are on a perfect holiday, like just a few little while back, I witnessed a very, very beautiful sunset. So my mind was not going at that time. Maybe, if I could see just a couple of more palm trees, and, maybe that bird would hit like a pure F note, while chirping. When it becomes, when I didn't have that friction with reality, right? There was no problem and I was happy, simply happy. There is, and all of you would have experienced something like this. But as soon as you encounter something like that triggering news item, or that, wet towel on the bed, or another example we've discussed, right? Somebody honking behind you, immediately that I don't like it, that craving kicks in, right? So there was no craving when I was enjoying the sunset. I was not going mad that if I lose this sunset, I'll never be happy again. I just simply happy, no complaints, no friction with the reality, right? As soon as you have that friction, that can cause craving, which you can diffuse and see if there is some way to address that friction, something useful, something constructive that you can do that is good for you, good for others. But instead of seeing that, as long as craving is there, it is all about that story of you, right? Why things are not the way you want, why that never happens for you, or why it ought to happen for you, why you deserve it, so different people have different flavors of storytelling in their mind, and you get caught up in that, don't come out with anything useful to do. So this is the next thing that happens after craving. You are modeling the world, and your modeling of the world is extremely colored by whether there is craving or not, right? Somebody honked behind me, the reality could be they are maybe rushing to the hospital, but without knowing that reality, because I'm using models to compress things. If I'm in Delhi, I would think I can go and think like Delhi's like this only. Delhi is full of all people who are unruly, and now I'm going to get back at this person. I'm going to take my revenge somehow. I'm going to bash my car into him. Like, and there are examples of road rage where people end up taking each other's lives as well, right? So craving is sustaining that and coloring that entire storytelling, how you are creating the universe in the moment, what is the meaning you are assigning to things, how you are creating a narrative around that. So this is you modeling the environment with very limited information. Again, going back to the quote that we used earlier in the talk, right? So all models are inaccurate. We need to understand that whatever model we have is inaccurate. What we need to see is it useful? Is it helping me do something constructive with my life? Is it improving my life in any way? And if it passes that test without craving, without keeping aside whether I like it or I don't like it, right? Diffusing that craving. And this is not a intellectual decision that you can say that I'll keep aside the I like it and I don't like it because I have a very strong objective intellect and I'll figure out what is the right thing to do. You don't have that option. As long as that craving mechanism is active within you, which is characterized by that tightness in your mind, you are going to pick up facts, you are going to build narratives that are colored by that I like it, I don't like it. And I'll give you a great example of this. Okay. So in 2011, there was a study done of judgments given in Israel, right? Specifically, parole judgment. So, number of convicts came up for parole. And the judges of the highest seniority, highest quality, for them, the rate of giving parole went down from 60% in the morning when they were fresh and ready to get to work, and it went down to almost 0% by the time it was lunchtime. They had been giving decisions, they were physically fatigued, they were possibly hungry, and although there wasn't a significant difference in the quality of the cases or the cases that were made for parole, it went down from 60% to 0%. So never trust that I'll be intellectually objective. As long as the craving is there, that I like it, that I don't like it is going to color your entire narrative, your entire modeling of reality. Every model is wrong is your model, useful is what you need to see. Without craving, you can actually get to a point where you can see what is the most constructive thing that I can do for myself and for other people that are involved here. And as long as the craving is there, you're going to go round and eventually feed the I like it or I don't like it mind. And what happens after clinging? After clinging, you take on a personality. Okay, so let's quickly retrace our path to see what happens after clinging. So, again, we started with some underlying conditioning formations, some information processing abilities, connection between our physical and mental realms, sense basis with which to perceive the world, right? This is the underlying configuration or system that we walk into any moment with, right? And then there was the first interaction with environment. So there are many interactions happening with environment, and one of them in we talked about, right? So, for example, a smell hitting the nose and the corresponding information processing faculty being activated, right? And similarly, it can be something else. The eye seeing the visual information of the wet towel on the bed coming to the eye, and the visual processing faculties kicking in, right? And accordingly, there is a sensation which is colored by your conditioning, your context, your experiences in life, etc. Right? You have a sensation that is painful or pleasant or neutral. After this, craving kicks in. The I like it, I don't like it mind. If it is painful, I don't like it, I don't want it, get this away from me. If it is pleasant, I like it, I want it, I'll do anything for it, right? So that is the flavor of craving. And how strong the craving is also depends on how deep the attachment is, also depends on your conditioning, right? So you might see in your own practice. So sometimes there would be certain thought processes that are very, very close to you, that you take very personally, that you're very attached to. And letting go of the craving in that is much harder. Realizing that you're caught in that is much harder. Having to repeat the 6 hours multiple times to come back to the object of attention may be required, right? So craving brings a flavor of liking, disliking, starts making it personal for the first time. Impersonally, the contact happened, impersonally, the sensation happened. Every contact is bringing up a sensation. It's all going. It's not about you so far. Craving starts to make it about you. Clinging helps you to model what's happening in the world and put a story around it. So your views and opinions start coming in, and they're heavily colored by the craving, right? So what you think about the world, what you think about the situation, how do you interpret it, right? Somebody, for example, that is parked, maybe leaving a lot of space from the next vehicle, and you make a judgment about it immediately before you maybe realize that potentially it's a handicapped person that needs wheelchair access, right? The samurai in our story made a judgment about what's happening, modeled the environment in a way that was not necessarily true. He initially modeled it in a way where somebody was insulting him, and this was especially ridiculous because the other person was physically no match for him, right? So once you form your worldview, right? So, and this is a basic any evolution. It's an evolutionary requirement, right? That you need to model your environment and you need to respond to it. You see a tiger, you need to have some opinion about it and start going towards action, right? So now we are starting to make the journey towards action. We have modeled the world, we have come up with some opinions and views about it, and what we do is now we start to default to habitual tendencies. So, what are habitual tendencies? We have lots of habits, right from waking up and brushing our teeth to maybe rolling our eyes when somebody makes a certain type of joke, or they repeat a story that they've told 10 times before, right? So, we have a lot of habitual tendencies. And what happens is habits actually are very good from the perspective of energy conservation. If you start thinking about everything from first principles, it's going to be extremely taxing on your mind and may not be able to help you immediately, right? So, for example, if you're crossing the street and you hear a loud horn that sounds like a vehicle that is speeding towards you, you're not going to sit and think about the physics of that vehicle coming and hitting you and what it might mean for your future health. You will have an ingrained habitual tendency to kind of jump out of the way, right, immediately. And those habitual tendencies are actually useful. Again, like models, some habitual tendencies are useful, right? But we also have habitual tendencies where, for instance, right, somebody, you know, suppose a few people have to get to a place and one of the people is getting late in getting ready and the other person is fretting, they are looking at their watch continuously, they're knocking on the door, they are wasting their time getting frustrated thinking about other times that this has happened, right? So habitual tendencies kick in after this, and habitual tendencies are the easiest way for the mind to take action because they don't require thinking from first principles. It is hard to think from first principles and it is not always useful, right? Like in the case of the car speeding towards you, it's not useful to think in terms of first principles. And along with these habitual tendencies, and these habitual tendencies depend a lot on how much craving that is there, right? A person might, for example, come home after a very tiring day, right? And at that time, their child might play a prank on them. And the habitual tendency is to be irritated when you're tired, you're expecting sympathy, consideration, and the habitual tendency is to be irritated, right? And when you're happy, the habitual tendency is to be extremely gracious, right? You come back happy, refreshed from something good that's happened, and the child plays the same prank, and you have a very different way of looking at it. You have a very different way of modeling that situation, and you have a very different way of responding to that situation, or rather reacting to that situation, right? And you're defaulting to different habitual tendencies. So the context, the intensity of the craving, the way you have made a story around that moment, right? The story around the moment when you're happy is that, wow, what a lovely child, full of vitality, full of spirit, so creative, right? And I'm so proud of him or her, and so lucky to have him or her in my life, right? And the story or narrative in your mind can be like, you know, why can't I have some time to wind down, right? Why does everybody need something from me all the time? Why does this child not know how to behave, right? What's up with them, right? So your story can be very different. Again, it is depending on the sensation, depending on the craving. If you let go of the craving, you can think about things in a very different way, right? So habitual tendencies of thinking, habitual tendencies of planning your response, habitual tendencies of acting start kicking in, and this leads to the birth of personality and action. So what is birth of personality and action? You finally assume, so your mind goes through different things, right? So when you're getting late, you might, on one occasion, you might simply keep to yourself, not bother the other person, and fume internally, right? If the craving is strong, if the craving is let go, you understand, hey, the person cannot just jump out if they're not ready yet, right? So why burn my blood after this? Maybe I can talk to them about getting ready a little earlier the next time. Maybe that is more useful rather than actually saying something when they're possibly even very worried about facing you and having to listen about getting late, right? And through these, and another day you might just end up screaming. So that is also a habitual tendency that you might have, right? And probably your mind is kind of circling through which kind of habitual tendencies to come through. Or you may be in an unexpected situation for which your mind doesn't have a very set kind of habitual tendency. So looking at the context, looking at the specific story that your mind has woven around the situation, the what your clinging has made the story, you have next the birth of a personality and action, right? So if you take the example of the samurai warrior, so when the Zen monk started teaching his lesson, so with the impact of the craving, he assumed a personality that was aggressive and murderous, whereas he could have gone into the personality of a student. So I mean, it's the same person, but you can assume completely different personalities depending on the underlying craving, clinging, and habitual tendencies. And instead of so he became like maybe Keanu Reeves and John Wick, where he could have been Keanu Reeves in The Matrix and actually taken a great life lesson without getting to the point of chopping off the monk's head, right? And remember that in our lives, all the time, we won't be coming across extremely insightful and compassionate monks who are willing to stick their neck out just so that we can learn a lesson. Most people are not going to interact with us in that way. So, with the craving, with the clinging, if we do not let go of it, we end up assuming personalities that are simply either self destructive or harmful to people around us. Every time we lose our temper, every time we get into a white hot rage, every time we start, and it could take multiple forms, right? It could be having getting completely stuck in self doubt, right? So there might be something that comes up. You might have financial insecurity, for instance, right? So a sensation of seeing something that you want to buy, and maybe you see something that you want to buy and maybe you can't afford it, right? And painful sensation comes up, and there is a craving that I don't like it. There is a clinging of views and opinions about why did this happen to me? Why am I the unlucky one? Why couldn't better things have happened to me? Why couldn't I have been born into a richer home? Or why couldn't I have been given that promotion that was given to the other person, or something or the other like that? You can get into extremely complicated stories, and you have a habitual tendency of then getting frustrated, maybe sedating yourself with drugs and alcohol, and maybe withdrawing from people that care about you, maybe lashing out at people that care about you, right? So as long as craving is there, it is going to keep you unsatisfied, and it is going to color all your actions with that greed or aversion, right? So either with greed for something that is pleasant, or aversion for something that is painful, or that is painful, right? And ignorance about this entire process happening when it is something neutral. We're taking things personally again and again. Maybe it is neutral, but you're strengthening that action of allowing that craving to dictate the views and opinions you form about the world, the habitual tendencies that kick in, and eventually the personality that you assume. So if we look at it, we are almost at we are completing that entire movement from attentional movement one to attentional movement two. to, right? You were doing something, some contact happened, some information event happened in the environment, and from being something impersonal, it became very personal. You got caught up in that story, and now it became the most important thing in your life, as long as craving was underlying it. And if there was craving, it continued to push you towards more and more unwholesome states by saying that I can't be happy unless I have this, or I don't. I have what I like, or I don't have what I like, and I can do any kind of action for it. The samurai was ready to kill that monk just for uttering a few words, because that was his habitual tendency when the craving was strong with the flavor of I don't like it. Great. So I'll take a pause at that. I'll see all of you at the morning practice. And tomorrow evening, we'll have a live session. I'll be reading one of the suttas. It will be quite interesting. And like I said, do plan to do a sitting right after the sutta reading. It will be quite an interesting experience. Okay. That's it for today. Thank you so much.